There's a very controversial debate that I'm going to bring up, and I might hurt some feelings. That it's plagued churches, it's divided families, divided so many people. And we are his portion, and he is our prize. Sing with me. Drawn to redemption by the grace in his eyes. If grace is an ocean, we're all sinking. Ready? Let's sing it loud. And heaven meets earth like an... Oh, okay. The debate here, is it unforeseen kiss or sloppy wet? Okay, if you're about the unforeseen kiss, just yell right now, woo! What about the sloppy wet? Who's about the sloppy wet? Y'all are weird. Y'all are strange. That's crazy. Yeah, like what do we sing there, right? I know John Mark McMillan, he wrote the song How He Loves, and it was sloppy wet, right? But then David Crowder's like, I don't know about that. That's a little gross. You know, unforeseen. I asked my wife, I asked Kate on the way here, I was like, what do you prefer? Like, if someone, and maybe I want to ask this controversial question again. Like, do you want to, like if, you know, you're getting to know someone, you're starting to date, like, do you want an unforeseen kiss or a sloppy wet for be the first one? It puts the song in a new light, right? Yeah, that's that's a little crazy, right? I want you to think about that for a moment. But the song brings a truth to us that when heaven meets earth, there's something that happens that's very special. It could be sloppy wet, it could be unforeseen, it could be a whisper. Throughout this week, we've heard different stories, different moments that people have just described on their journey of faith, on their journey of service, and heaven met earth. All this to say is that when heaven meets earth, lives are changed. Activate. How do we activate our faith? Heaven must meet earth. Heaven must meet earth. Father God, I pray that in these moments, that heaven will invade in this place, in the minds. Lord, please take away any distractions. Lord, please invade us now, Lord. I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Tonight, we are going to explore that a little bit more. I'm going to have 3 parts, 2 main parts. First one's going to be a biblical foundation. I got a little bit more time here tonight, so we're going to spend a little time in the Word. And the second main part is just my story. I'm just going to share with you guys just my journey, and then at the end, I'm going to make an invitation. So let's get in the Word for a moment. Our scripture focus this week has been Isaiah chapter 6. Here in this chapter, the prophet Isaiah, God is encountering him in this context where really Jerusalem is laying in a really, really tough time. Isaiah chapter 6, verses 1-4 tells this. It was in the year King Uzziah died that I saw the Lord. He was sitting on a lofty throne, and the train of his robe filled the temple. Attending him were mighty seraphim, each having 6 wings. With 2 wings they covered their faces. With two they covered their feet, and with 2 they flew. They were calling out to each other, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of heaven's armies. The whole earth is filled with his glory." Their voices shook the temple to its foundations, and the entire building was filled with smoke. For Isaiah, the curtain is torn wide open. He's beginning to see a new reality, and he's let in on what's really happening behind the scenes. You see, Isaiah is, as I said before, Jerusalem is in a time of instability. There's Jerusalem's leaders, they're being judged for the rebellion against God. And not only rebellion, but there's idolatry in the city, and there's injustice toward the poor. And now the king is dead. I don't know about you, but this kind of sounds like some of the craziness and instability we see in our lives today, in our world today. However, in this mess, it's in this place that God decides to open up the scene, to open up heaven and let Isaiah know what's really happening behind the scenes. Notice verse 5. Then I said, it's all over. I am doomed, for I am a sinful man. I have filthy lips, and I live among a people with filthy lips. Yet I have seen the King, the Lord of heaven's armies. When heaven meets earth, you begin to see your story in the light of God's story. Isaiah, his mind, his heart is being open to what's really happening, and he's exposed. He sees that it's not just him who is sinful, but the people around him. But he realizes God is on the throne. God is holy. And he begins to see his story in the light of heaven's story. Notice this next part. This has been the verse that we've been focusing on this week. Isaiah 6 verse 8 says, and then I heard the Lord asking, whom should I send as a messenger to this people? Who will go for us? And Isaiah says, here I am, send me. When heaven meets earth, God invites us into the story of redemption. When we see heaven, when we see what God is doing behind the scenes, yes, we're exposed. Yes, we see how messy our hearts are. We see how messy our surroundings are. But we realize the call that God has for us. And we see his invitation. I remember lying in my bed there at Southwestern, there in Miller Hall, and it was my junior year, and I remember I was reading a book. I was really just trying to just learn more. I was a theology major during that time, and it was my junior year, and I remember just reading, and I remember a thought came to my mind. I have to go be a student missionary. Now, I kind of got a little annoyed because I was like, man, do I really want to do? That's not really part of my plan. That's not really what I'm thinking as, that's not the ideal for me in my story. You see, I went in theology. I was coming in. I was like, man, I'm going to go be a pastor. I want to go be in this successful church, do this, do that. Honestly, I kind of saw all the things that it did kind of as stepping stones. Oh, I get this opportunity. This can go on my resume. Or this, I could meet the right person, and maybe I can get my name out there. That's really how I thought. And I remember hearing so many people talk about missions. Isai, one of my best friends, you might know him, Isai Ramirez here. I remember he came back from the Philippines and he was on fire. He was talking about missions. And I heard so many other people there, right? And I was like, that's not really for me. But here in this moment, I remember, man, I have to go. And I was like, man, this is not. But I knew, so I went to Spiritual Life and Development office there. I met with Isai, he helped me out and got me registered. And I remember, okay, where do I go? And I remember, maybe I could go here, maybe I could go there. I decided to go to Palau. And I realized, man, I just have to go. And I'll be honest with you, some of my motives were not the best motives. I kind of just went because I was like, yeah, I did feel God's calling, but at the same time, I was like, oh man, he went and was a student missionary. That's going to look great on his resume, and yeah, it kind of does, but that's not the point of why we serve, right? That's not the point. But for me, I was like, okay, yeah, I did feel the calling, but So I was like, okay, it's not part of my plan, but I'm going to do it. When heaven met earth, just for a moment there in my dorm room, I did not know how crazy my life would just go after choosing to go to Palau. I went out there, and the thing is, my story began to overlap with so many different people. I was just sitting here with some of the SMs there in my year, Hannah, Corey, Kate, my wife. My story overlapped with so many different people during that time. It overlapped with the stories of so many of the students. I joined the family of the Palau SMs. And some of you maybe you've gone out there. Maybe you don't know me, but we're family. I began to see something there when I was in Palau, that when we choose to serve, we begin to see our story intersect and overlap with so many different people. I remember just being in my classroom and, just teaching. I taught Bible, I taught U.S. history, and I remember just some of those conversations, some of those deep conversations, some of those questions where students ask, like, oh man, like, whoa, you're thinking deep. And I was like, for me, it was awesome. And I remember some of the tough days too. But it was awesome just how I was able to do my part and what so many student missionaries prior to me did. And we got to see awesome things. One of the things, though, as well, that I realized while I was out there was that the church has flaws. And I also got to see that. You see, a lot of my foundation of faith was in the church, right? I grew up in the church. And honestly, like some of the churches I went to growing up were awesome, healthy churches. And maybe you've been part of those churches. But when I went out to Palau, yeah, like the reality is we got to see some stuff that like, whoa, I did not expect that. They didn't tell me that on the brochure. And that's the thing. For me, I realized that my experience out there, and maybe some of the other SMs here, if you've been out there, your experience, what you sign up for, and what they tell you, you're out there, you're like, it doesn't really happen. You're like, yo, you're going to go do these different things, and like, you're going to succeed, and you're going to be baptizing people. And yeah, we did some of that, but then a lot of it, you're like, what? And I'm not going to get into the details. But in reality, my time there in Palau began something in me, something in my story that began to, and I'm going to use this word that some people don't like, but it began to deconstruct some of the things in the foundation of my faith. Like Palau, honestly, being there, it had to kind of wreck me and kind of break me a little bit. And it's not that God was trying to do these different things. He kind of just opened my eyes. And we'll see that whenever we do choose to serve, whenever we choose to go and do something, we're excited, we're happy, but then that happens. Maybe you've experienced that at summer camp. Maybe you experienced it, I don't know, at your church. But the reality is, for me, my story began to change. I came back after my year there, and when I got back to Southwestern for my senior year, it was a tough transition. It was a tough transition. Some of you guys who've done something like this, you know that it's tough. Man, I was depressed when I got back. You see, like when you're out there, you're always you get to see heaven and earth constantly. You're challenged, and then you see God come through. You see these different things happen, and you're like, wow, like the gospel's real. Yeah, sometimes you see these flaws and some stuff that you didn't sign up for, but you see something real. I got to see some of these students and those conversations, and I got to see just the gospel click. But then when I got back, I'm like, I literally remember hanging out with some friends after I had gotten back, and I was like, yo, some of the stuff like that's so important you're talking about is just a waste of time. And I was like, what? Like, and it really kind of just, I came back and I was like, what am I doing here? I'm like, God, what are you trying to do? What are you trying to do here? It taught me, these moments here, it taught me that God doesn't really work as we think he will work. After my senior year, I transitioned again into pastoral ministry. And man, I was ready to go baptize all of like New Mexico. That's where I went out. I was like, yo, I'm ready. Like, I'm excited. I'm ready to go. And then I remember getting to like my first board meeting and I'm like, what? This is some craziness. Yeah, so it's like my time in Palau, the one decision I made in my dorm room, going through all this, I went out to pastor, all these crazy transitions. It's like, honestly, it's like every year and a half, I do like a crazy transition, and you'll be able to see that as we get, as I finish here. But yeah, I went out there and I was like, wait. Okay, yeah, there was some flaws and some different things, like, yeah. And it was awesome out there in Palau. Yeah, I came back to, Southwest, and I was kind of depressed and just like, I don't really know what I'm doing, but I guess I'm going to go try to do my best out there, get excited. And yeah, it was just tough. When I realized that God doesn't just work in some of these, like heaven meets earth in some of these huge ways, and we see huge change, but most of the time when heaven meets earth, when God does something, when God's mission is seen, it's a slow and very patient work that is so slow compared to the speed that we want things to go to. And I remember like going to these 4 churches, and the thing is like God really did something in my heart there. It was tough, it was challenging, but God began to show me some different things, and I'll be honest, like it was really tough. I went out there, I'm like, you know what? And I remember I had some ideas, you know how like the young pastor is like, oh man, I got some ideas, and and like some of the board members like, oh yeah, let's do this or that. And then March 2020 hit. No, there was no class in the undergraduate program there at Southwestern that like, all right, if a pandemic hits, this is what you got to do. Like there was nothing. We were like, what? And the thing is, like, I was so discouraged, some of the challenges, some of these different things, COVID hitting and the isolation and the loneliness and all these different things, like, I'll be honest with you, I got to a point, I mentioned that word earlier, that deconstruction. I got to a point where I was like, okay, I do believe God exists. I do believe God is real, but he must not care. A lot of times we're scared of some of the doubts, some of the, like, when people share these things, because it makes us uncomfortable, right? But I want to let you know that sometimes God kind of has to let you go there for a moment. Because there's some things in the foundations of our faith that should not be there. And for me, I was like, my foundation was in the church. I was like, oh, like this, we're the church. We're the remnant people. We're gonna go out there, like, and then when I saw it, I was like, man, all that remained was like, what is going on, right? And not everyone's bad. I'm not trying to bash Seventh-day Adventism or anything. Like, this is just part of my story. This is my point of view, very limited. But I got to the point where I was like, man, like, I saw some of the issues, some of the things that my church members were going through, some of the things that were going on in my heart. And I got to a point where I was like, man, like, God must not care. But heaven meets earth. I wanted God to show up in this huge way. Like, I would just go turn on. I wanted to see if it did something. Sorry. I really did. Sorry. I wanted to see if it was going to turn it on, but what I wanted was to, like, God to just show up, right? We expect, like, heaven meets earth. We prayed, we did this, and then this happens in our lives. Like that sucks. That really sucks. And God for me showed up in like March and April 2020 through some friends. Some of my good friends, Samson and Eliab, two of my really good friends who we graduated together. One of them came from Oklahoma City, one came from El Paso, all the way to Clovis, New Mexico, driving 5-6 hours each. And we're like, bro, we're here. And God, for me in those moments, like, he showed up through friends. Heaven meets earth when we decide to be there for one another. What was awesome, the next month, one of my childhood friends, Nate, moved from St. Louis to just come and like, hey, I'm doing school online, I'm not doing anything, I'm just gonna go move with you. And literally, him coming to my house and moving in with me, honestly, I feel like just saved me. Because my mind, and the foundation of my faith was crumbling. And instead of God teaching me the right theology, instead of God telling me the right doctrine, no, he showed up through people. A couple months later, July, this one girl slides in my DMs. Because I posted like this picture of a ramen packet. I forgot the name now, but this Filipino ramen. I don't know if someone might know it. Yes, that one. I posted because I found it in this little Asian market there in Clovis, and I was like, yo. So I posted it. I was like, hey, like throwback to Palau, like because we would always eat that. And then this girl just like, hey, that's awesome. It was Kate, and I was like, yo, I'll send you some. And I did. I sent it, and I was like, and we just kept talking, and we didn't stop. And then 4 months later, we're like, actually that week, the second week we were talking, we were both like, we're gonna get married. Like literally. And 4 months later, we did. Okay, you might be shocked, but the world was ending, okay? Like, it was the apocalypse, okay? It literally was the apocalypse. So we were like, if we're gonna face it, we're gonna face it together, whatever. And let me tell you, for that, like, it was God. Like, for God really just, it was amazing. Like, it was like, and okay, I don't advise you this. I'll say that as well. Like, I don't advise that to you. That's not like, oh, this is like what Josh said. Like, he was a pastor for 3 years. He could do it. Like, that's good advice. No, like, everyone, that you do what you want to do, right? But we ask people, so we could get the details of that another time. But the way God moved in our hearts, the way God just like, it just made sense. And we just knew, like, and that's the thing, we spent a whole year in service, and I was like, yo, let's do this. And she was crazy enough to be like, yeah, let's do it. But getting married is really something, like, people don't understand that when you get married, you sign up for something. Like, the brochure, like, you go somewhere, like, oh, this is the thing you're signing up for. Like, some stuff was just not on the brochure for marriage. And that's the thing, for me and for us, honestly, like, marriage, like, there's things in your story and in my story that I wanted to hide, that my marriage exposed them. And that's the thing, like, some of y'all, let me just do a little side note, relationship advice, tip 73. Relationships are gonna expose you. The stuff you're trying to hide, it'll expose you. It was toward the end of our first year that my dad got sick. My dad got sick with COVID. And the thing is, like, we were having some challenges with the churches. So, like, on top of all that stuff, like, and we're recently getting married, like, man, that's tough. And my dad got sick, and everybody was praying. And he was like, okay, like, he was doing okay. But 4 weeks later, my dad passed away. And it was honestly one of the biggest, probably the biggest hurdle I've had to get through in my life. And the thing is, when just the craziness of life hits you, the things that you wanted to hide, they kind of just come up. See, the thing for me, and I'll be completely honest with you guys, like since like middle school, I had been addicted to pornography. And the thing is, I didn't share that. Like I shared, oh yeah, I struggled. And I thought because the purity culture that we constantly kind of hear, like there's some myths that were like, once you get married, you'll be fine. And I kind of believed that. Like I did believe it. And I was like, oh, like that's going to go away or whatever. And it kind of did for a while. But like once my dad died, like I was grieving on my own and just like medicating on my own. And I just went for months. And I was just kind of just going back in my old ways, because the thing is, the things in our story, right, that we want to hide, they're eventually going to come up. If we go back to the story of Isaiah, heaven, right, meets earth. He's in the temple, and what does he say? I'm a man of filthy lips. And that's the thing with marriage, and it was just so tough. So far, if you've noticed, transition, I went to Palau, I came back, finished college, went to pastor, COVID hits, I get married, my dad dies. A couple months later, I come to seminary. And right before coming to seminary, we're dealing with all this craziness, some of the challenges. And I'm not trying to paint the picture of like the church, like, oh, it was crazy. But that's the thing, there's some saints, and there's some sinners in there. And I think all of us are sinners, okay? But there's some saints they're all saints. They're all saints, but some of them are a little crazy. And we're just hitting some challenges. So think about like what was going on in March. There was so many of these challenges. I'm hiding, and then I'm like, we have to go to seminary, another transition. Probably like the week before, something kind of just woke up in my mind, and I'm like, I have to tell Kate. And let me tell you, like, Kate has met me with so much grace. Since then, I came to seminary. I decided to get into groups. I decided to get into therapy. And let me tell you, like, that part, like, heaven met earth for me. My faith has been activated through some of those avenues. And the thing is, really, I found out about groups because I went out for burgers and disc golf with a friend, and he told me, hey. And he got me introduced to Bill Wells, who's done some talks here on campus, and he's one of the ones that runs the groups here on campus. And his story, remember I told you that when we serve God, our story is intertwined with the story of heaven, and his story is now like benefiting me and blessing me. And there's been people that I've been able to share with, and they're like, man, like, yo, thank you for sharing that. And they're out being leading on groups. What am I trying to say here? What am I trying to say here? Is that our stories fit in the grander story of God. And God has used so many instances and people to show me the reality of heaven. When my faith was low, a friend brought me back up. That moment in my dorm room was so pivotal. And I saw how God used that one moment to just put me on this journey of faith. And when I see that story, I see God's story. He's writing my story. And tonight, my story is overlapping with yours. I don't know a lot of you, and this is maybe just one moment with you. But I really pray that God uses this moment to activate something in you. Ephesians 2:19-21 says, so now you Gentiles are no longer strangers and foreigners. You are citizens along with all of God's holy people. You are members of God's family. Together we are his house, built on the foundation of the apostles and the prophets, and the cornerstone is Christ Jesus himself. We are carefully joined together in him, becoming a holy temple for the Lord. My story is your story. Our stories are God's story. We are one family. We are building a house for eternity. We are a temple where heaven and earth meet. Where you walk, heaven and earth meet. I'm gonna finish with this part of my story. Last year, I really dove in because I made a commitment to my wife that I'm gonna dive into this. Like I need healing, and I really dove into therapy at that time. I hadn't joined groups yet, but it was last year. I came and really just dove in, and I was dealing with a lot of grief. I was really just exploring a lot of my story, and I was here at the CTC, and my counselor there, like we began to work on that relationship with my dad. Because I'll be honest with you, my dad was kind of a mixed bag. Like what was really good about him was like so good, but the bad stuff was bad. And like he was very absent as I was growing up. And there's some pains there. And I remember as I was dealing and I was talking to, on this particular day, I was talking to my counselor, and we're just talking about that. I had been working a few sessions already of like, man, I want to get to know my dad. I know he's gone, but I want to get to know him. Because I feel guilty. I feel guilty that like whenever I would go back home, like from college, like I would just go hang out with my friends, and I'd be like, hey dad, what's up? How you been? And I'd just go. And I felt guilty because there were so many of those moments where, yeah, it was just tough. And I was just wrestling with that in my sessions. And he answered me this question. If you had an opportunity to spend 1 hour with any celebrity, any famous person, any artist, maybe any person in history, Jesus Christ himself, or spend an hour with your dad, what would you do? What would you pick? I told him, hey, I'd pick that hour with my dad. That day, I left the session and I was heading to the seminary. And this was spiritual emphasis week at the seminary. And I'm getting into the parking lot and I see the speaker of the week of prayer there at the seminary. He's kind of like running out, like, I'm like, yo, and the thing is I had met him the day before and I was like, hey, Dr. Ramirez, his name was Johnny Ramirez, no relation. But I was like, hey, you need a ride somewhere or something? And he's like, yeah. You see, the speaker last year, he went to undergrad with my dad. And they studied theology together at Antillean College in Puerto Rico. And I was like, so I gave him a ride here on campus, and he was like trying to, hurry back, and I was like, oh yeah, I'll give you a ride, no worries. And I asked him, hey, can I just take some time? Like, I want to ask you some questions. Like, I'm working on something, in counseling that, like, I want to talk to you. So that, I went about my day. I went to class, and I let him know, hey, I'm on my way. And where he was staying, and we just talked, and I got to know some stuff about my dad I didn't know. That they would go, all his friends, they would go out to Johnny's house and like study Greek together, and that reminded me of me and my friends, Isai and Adi. We'd always go to Isai's house, and we'd always just like get snacks and just hang out late. And I was like, oh man, that's so cool. And I got to know some other things about my dad, how it was tough for him being from Peru, like being in a culture that was different in Puerto Rico, and some of his insecurities there. We began to talk some more, and I shared with him like that guilt I was really feeling. I feel guilty. I feel like I had all those opportunities to spend time with my dad, and I didn't take them. And he told me, son, those moments were enough for me. And in that moment, I felt like my dad was talking to me. The question that my counselor had asked me before, if you could spend 1 hour, I spent 1 hour with my dad that day. How is it that this one random guy, I had never met him, gets invited, probably got invited months in advance, how is it that my first semester at seminary, he's the speaker, I run into him. How is that? Heaven met earth there for me. And I got to spend that hour with my dad. When heaven meets earth, our faith is activated. Why? Because there I saw that God is interested in my story. God is interested in my story. God is interested in your story. We've heard stories all this week, and now they've overlapped in our minds. We've heard them, we've come and go. But don't miss it, that God is inviting you into his story, because all our mess, all our craziness, all the hurts that we've been through, the hurts that we've inflicted on others, all of our story begins to make sense in the grander story of God. And he's inviting you. How do I know that? Isaiah 49, verses 14 to 16 tell us this. And the thing is, honestly, a lot of us feel this way. Jerusalem says, the Lord has deserted us. I felt that. The Lord has forgotten us. God responds, never can a mother forget her nursing child. Can she feel no love for the child she has born? But even if that were possible, I would not forget you. See, I have written your name on the palms of my hands. Other translations and in the original text, sorry, I'm a seminarian, I have to say that. Does it just say right? It says carved. I've gotten a couple tattoos. It sucks. It doesn't feel nice. God has tattooed your name on his hands. God is interested in your story. In the story of salvation, your story fits in it. Tonight, my invitation is to recognize that invitation, that your story, no matter what it is, you don't need to go be an SM. And that might not be your story. It might be. I don't know what your story is like. I don't know it. But it fits. If mine fits, yours fits. And your story fits in the story. All of our stories together, we're building on what the apostles did. We're building on the scriptures. We are the story. Jesus is the story. Will you accept that invitation? Your name is written. I would invite the chaplains from CFE to come up. I have to make an invitation. Hey, you give me an opportunity to preach, I'm gonna preach, I'm gonna invite people. I'm gonna invite the chaplains for CFE. I know there's people here that need to make that decision for baptism. Let them know. There's some of you that need to make that decision. Maybe to serve. Maybe you're just feeling forgotten and you're like, oh man, like, I don't know, like, but I just want to tell you, your story is part of God's story. Your name is written on his hand. He has not forgotten you. You are precious to him. You are most loved. You are part of his story. He wants you in his story. How will you respond?